Audio.
If you enjoy the stories on this podcast, you'll also like the stories in my book, Filmmaking Confidential, which isn't just for filmmakers, but also all artists and really any entrepreneur. Now an Amazon.com and Audible.com bestseller. I just want to say thank you to all of you who ordered it. If you haven't yet picked it up, it's available wherever books are sold in most countries around the world. Order it by visiting Audible or Amazon. To find out more, check out filmmakingconfidential.com and stevebalderson.com. And thank you. I'm Steve Balderson, and you're listening to the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. Each week, we meet with filmmakers, writers, actors, artists, and other notables. Today's guest is producer and documentary filmmaker Desh Amila. In 2018, he released his first film, Islam, The Future of Tolerance, featuring Sam Harris and Maajid Nawaz, and became the #1 iTunes documentary download worldwide. His second feature film is about to be released. Better Left Unsaid confronts political extremism. A serial entrepreneur, Desh founded Think Inc., a first-of-its-kind edutainment company that tours intellectuals throughout Australia and New Zealand. Speakers such as astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, historian of science Michael Shermer, political activist Dr Cornel West, and the late social political critic Christopher Hitchens. Desh has had quite the walk of life and loves to push social and political boundaries.
I was born in a place in Sri Lanka called Badulla, which is a very small town. Most Westerners would call it a village, but for us it was a town. And I always, growing up in a town very small like that, I always had ambition to leave the town, go to the big city. So in Sri Lanka, in year 5 is where you have this scholarship year, where if you score a certain amount and better, a certain score and better, you get the opportunity to pick the high school you go to, which I knew I was going to get a higher score so I can go to Colombo, which is the capital of Sri Lanka, or the financial capital of Sri Lanka. And I got good marks, so I got to pick my school. And I was the first in my family to ever leave the town. So that was my first journey, even in Colombo, and I still couldn't find where I fit in. Then I was like, okay, when I'm ready to go to university, I want to go out of the country. And again, no one in my family has ever got on a plane, ever left. So my initial plan, I was told when I was even a little kid, I'm a good storyteller. So I was like, all right, so I want to be a filmmaker. So I did theater and whatnot. So my first plan was try to go to India, which is the closest. And India has the world's largest cinema industry. And I thought, okay, it's a good place to start. I applied for universities over there. None got back to me. I distinctly remember just walking down quite, upset and down, on a road of Colombo. And I saw this big exhibition about Australian universities. Now, keeping in mind, my family, they do not have the financial capability to do anything even remotely what was in my head, such as sending me overseas. Like, they don't even have the money to buy a plane ticket. But I thought, what's the harm? Walked in, submit my details to 4 universities in Australia. Within less than a month, all 4 got back to me and said, you are perfect for us, come over. And I was like, oh, so maybe I should consider. So from there on, it was this, marathon that ran for many, many months, me first convincing and then coming up with strategies with my parents. How do we get the money to get out? Because it wasn't that simple. Western countries have very strict guidelines. How do you come over to a country from a country like Sri Lanka? And I already knew a lot of my rich friends who got their visa rejected. But we studied how the whole process worked, and we figured out how to make it work. And still, there was a really low chance. But somehow, I got a visa. And then it was like, my parents were like, okay. So all my relatives, friends, everyone available just got together, pooled their money, bought me one-way ticket to Australia, and gave me, I think it worked out to be roughly around 500 Australian dollars worth, and said, good luck. That's it. I was 19. I got on a plane, never been on a plane, and landed in Australia. And then, keeping in mind, I couldn't speak English. I had a general understanding of the language, but I couldn't really speak. And Australians, have they have a unique way of speaking. So, I remember, my first university lecture, I did not understand a single word that was coming out of the lecture. And I was like, right. So that's my story. I managed to get to Australia, and, from there on, I built everything.
In college, in university, what did you study?
So I studied filmmaking and photography. This was early 2000s. To be 100% honest, I have not used a single thing I studied because as an immigrant, my way of living was survival mode. Like I had $500 next to my name. And from there on, my parents managed to pay for the first semester of university fees, but it was incumbent on me to the next 3-4 years. So my whole thing was, I need to get a job. So I end up having 3 jobs and supporting myself through university. So, I have the classic immigrant story. Like I was sleeping at train stations because there wasn't enough time between this job and, going to university. So at uni, I really didn't have the mental capacity to comprehend that was what was coming my way. Plus at that point, it was this interesting shift was happening in the industry. It was really going digital, but the university didn't have the capacity and the facilities. Like, I kid you not, in 2000, I was learning 8mm and 16mm cameras. I know that's what first semester, second semester, what was going on. Like my final semester, the final project was made on 16mm camera. And this is now 2004. So, I got the basics, but not really. So whatever I'm doing right now, completely and utterly just self-taught. I just put myself in there and started doing things and see, that's how I'm making film now.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, I still say today, you learn more on your first day of your first film set than you ever do at, any school.
I completely agree.
You are a serial entrepreneur and you're constantly evolving and creating new things, and you're reaching out branches everywhere. At what point did they all sort of start to come together?
It really took an enormous amount of time. It was only in 2014 where everything started working. I made a decision around 2006 that I have that personality where I need to work for myself. I'm not a good employee. Right. It was hard. I realized that, but I didn't have the business knowledge, acumen, or anything like that when I made the decision, which in retrospect was really not the smartest call. I didn't have much money next to my name, but I decided I'm going to make it on my own mentality. I tried so many different things before it eventually started paying off in 2014. At that point, I was running this company called Think Inc., which was an intellectual touring company, which is not a thing that existed before Think Inc. And I toured Sam Harris and invited Majid Nawaz to join. So during that tour, we filmed it, but the intention was to make a little reel out of it, maybe put it on YouTube. That was the intention. But as time went through and we finished the tour, we realized there's actually something here. I got reached out by an experienced filmmaker from New York, Jay Shapiro. And he said, hey, did you guys film what you've done? And I said, yes. And he said, have you ever considered maybe, turning it into a documentary? And I was like, yes, it's really my dream. I came to Australia to eventually make films, and maybe it is time. So then initial plan was to just use the existing footage, but it was not filmed with any real intention of turning it into a documentary. So if you have seen the movie, the actual tour only makes like 2 minutes out of the whole movie, right towards the end, because there's really amazing thing that happened at the Sydney event. So we didn't use much of the actual event, but that was the beginning. So 2017 we completed the film. There are a couple of versions of it. One version was completed in 2018 towards the end, and that's what was distributed by Orchard. And then a theatrical cut was completed early this year.
Cool. Well, congratulations. It looks fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I love the topics and the meaning and the themes that you're addressing in all these projects, all of the different ones. Tell me a little bit about how you arrived at finding this part of your voice.
I've always had a curious mind. So I'll take you back to the moment when I realized that there has to be an audience like me that led to the creation of Think Inc. I was running primarily hip hop and R&B events. And, there's one event, there's 6,000 people listening to this artist, and just, the artist is going, put your hands up, and commanding the audience, and everyone's doing exactly what he's saying. And I was just watching that going, the amount of influence an entertainer has, it's amazing power. At that point, I was getting into philosophy. I went through this personal journey of understanding religion and philosophy, and I was reading these amazing thinkers, and I was like, I can't be the only one who likes these guys. Can I do something like what's happening here, this audience? Can I put an intellectual over there and get this kind of audience and get them to respond? Wouldn't it be fantastic if we can turn intellectuals into influencers? Because at that point in history, it wasn't really a thing, definitely not on this side of the world. When I had that moment, initially it was just relatively easygoing science stuff. But I first encountered criticism to something what I was doing was because one of the first people I toured was Dr. Michio Kaku. He's the co-founder of superstring theory. Now, string theory is quite controversial because some scientists find it to be, because it's somewhat unfalsifiable, that it's not real science. So some people are making fun of Dr. Michio Kaku. And I realized, oh, right. So, in some circles, some elite scientific circles, he was a joke for them. So I realized, oh, that's interesting. And then I started, thinking about what else is people just finding, sort of a touchy. Then I did a tour. I thought, let me try something that hasn't been done. Let me get a radical thinker that I am a big fan of, that I don't know if Australia even knows this guy. So I did a tour with Dr. Cornel West, who I always found quite fascinating. Initially, we weren't selling any tickets because Australia didn't know about him, but I had a plan. So I put him on one of the biggest talk shows in Australia, managed to convince them. And to date, and the second most watched show they've ever aired, because Dr. Cornel West turns anything into the Cornel West show. And Australia then bought tons of tickets, and we did well for that tour. But then that started bringing in these people who like this subject matter that is not in the mainstream. And my company, the brand Think Inc., started getting an audience like, oh, these guys are doing interesting things. From there on, I was, Edward Snowden's only virtual event in Australia and New Zealand. We did it while he was like, we just heard about him. And that led me in this path, this my curiosity, like what is interesting? Why are these things hard? The Edward Snowden tour, no bank in Australia would let me send the funds to him, because they were like, he's a fugitive. And I'm like, well, he's not convicted of anything. And I was like, this is interesting. Thousands of people want to hear this stuff. So that's what sort of led me to, I realized like Sam Harris was such a controversial character. I realized that the conversation was missing, a true conversation was missing. And I thought, now my events are getting thousands of people. Can we reach even larger, like millions of people? And that's where the film came in. And I'm interested in subject matter that for mainstream, that may be a little bit taboo. But it shouldn't be taboo because, one of the things I've learned over time is the West is what it is because of the Enlightenment values. And I come from a place where we had a civil war for 28 years. And when I lived in Sri Lanka, it was the most dangerous place for journalists. Over 100,000 people died. And, I was born in the year of the Civil War, 1981. And I came from a place where, curfews were the norm. I go from Colombo to Badulla, I get stopped 3 times as a child, and my national ID card is checked by people with AK-47s. That was the norm. And you come to the West, it doesn't happen. And part of that is because people can talk about anything. I mean, that was such a insane concept. You can't talk about, like, even at home, I remember, you don't talk about that stuff. Your parents will stop you if you say something. Not that someone's listening. It's not high tech, but there's a worry. So those kind of things interest me. And that's Islam and the Future of Tolerance is a great example, because I felt like the conversation was just bonkers. It's like, one group doesn't want to talk about it. The other groups think the entire world's problems is because of this, this Islam problem or the Muslim problem. And I was like, that's not really what should be happening. So I made the film, and my next film, which you alluded to, is in the similar vein. We're talking about the insanity that the global politics has become.
Well, I love that the whole idea of Better Left Unsaid is that you just mentioned that you came to a place where, it was okay to talk. Yeah. And it was okay to say anything and in fact, it's become not true. And what I love, about
right?
this project, you can't say anything anymore.
So you can imagine somebody like me who's lived through a certain experience to witness this. And I'm like, wait. This is what makes countries like Australia, America, many countries in Europe, what they are. So if you're going to start now policing these things, this is not going to end well. So I'm doing my part within, my capacity. And that's when this movie was presented to me in a very early stage as a concept by the director, Kurt Jaimungal, it had a very different feel to it. He had a slightly different concept of what the movie is going to be. And he was coming to me as an independent filmmaker, trying to get advice because he was a huge fan of Islam and the Future of Tolerance. So he emailed me and he asked, how do I do this? How do I do this? And I was giving him free advice. But eventually when I saw what he's put together, and I saw the potential, and this is something that I was just thinking about. And I was like, okay, we should actually make this. Let's do this right.
Excellent. It looks fantastic. I cannot wait to see that. Is it totally finished and you're just...
Okay, so where we at now, we picture locked it a couple of weeks ago. We are done with grading now. Just sound mixing is getting done and some final animation and credit stuff is getting done. So the plan is to have it finished this side of the year and then work on the marketing and distribution strategy.
And I gathered you were self-distributing, or are you working with any company? Yeah,
so my experience with Orchard, formerly Orchard, now 1091, for my first film, I think I've realized it's very common with filmmakers. It wasn't a pleasant one. It was just... it was a constant struggle to get anything done. I was excited because they're a Sony corporation. I'm like, yes, I'm going to make it now. But it was nothing like that when push came to shove. So I learned a ton. So for this movie, the plan is to self-distribute.
Filmmaker Desh Amila. Another great episode is a visit with The Asylum.
It exploded because big celebrities like Patton Oswalt or Mia Farrow and these other quirky, weird people started tweeting, I'm watching a crazy movie. What the hell's going on? What the hell is Sharknado? And then that started snowballing to everyone else talking about it at the same time.
You can hear my full interview with The Asylum at filmmakingconfidential.com or by subscribing for free to this podcast. When we come back, we'll talk more with Desh about his latest film, Better Left Unsaid, and confronting political extremism. Stay with us. Now, back to our conversation with Desh Amila.
There are two things I want to mention. One, there's going to be two versions of the movie release. There's going to be a director's cut, which is primarily Kurt's voice and Kurt's research and how Kurt wants to position the movie. Then there's a public version, which is primarily shaped by me, because the movie is told in 4 chapters. We came to the conclusion quite early that we have a different point of view with regards to chapter 4, which is perfect because in Islam and the Future of Tolerance, I tell the story of 2 people who fundamentally disagreed, but then they found the things they agree on, and they had the courage to speak about the things they disagree on. And that gave the audience the information they need, and you can make the conclusion yourself. So with this movie, we both agreed on the problem. We both agreed on that we need to talk about it and how to talk about it, but we disagreed on the solution. So chapter 4, there are 2 versions. Even the public version, I don't 100% agree with the solution we are providing. But my aim is to provoke conversation, force people to have this conversation about what we are talking about. Because tell us
briefly, what are you talking about in the movie?
So the movie is a political thesis about political extremism. And the mainstream conversation about political extremism is mainly about the far right, because it's actually very easy to explain what the far right wants. They haven't changed their position since they fought the whole world, right? Their position with regards to the ultimate resolution for their grievances is it's well known. But if you look at the political far left, now I'm making this statement as somebody who considered politically center left. I consider myself left. But the furthest of the left, it's not that clear. And this movie, what we're trying to do is initially trying to break down what are the political realities and beliefs of the furthest of the left, and where do they come from? Where the historical underpinnings, the philosophical underpinnings of that line of thinking, that is explained, and then we talk about the far right because it is important. We do mention the far right and also some of their political beliefs and what's happening now, and then we try to talk about how do we, especially in the West, not make the mistakes of going into either extreme. And then we present a solution, which I encourage people to watch to figure out if the solution we are presenting is the right one. But it's not presented in a way that here's a doctrine you need to follow. It is presented as here is a set of solutions that we think that might work moving forward. Now, again, the caveat is I disagree with some of the points. And I want to make it very clear. The reason that I decided to work with Kurt is I felt as, I have the ability and I have the knowledge from my last movie and also access to certain resources. I want to give the opportunity for somebody like Kurt, who's trying to have a good faith argument here, to have that voice, although I disagree to a certain degree.
On one hand, there is no such thing as a problem. Right? There is only our reaction to a situation that someone else might consider a problem.
Yeah.
Right. No, so, but let's say there is a situation that needs a solution, and you could try one way and find out it doesn't work. Well, you can try another one and find out it doesn't work, and that's fine. It's not to say that either one is better or worse than the other, but a solution is important, for any challenging situation. So it's better to try one out before discounting it, I think.
Absolutely. The other point I want to make is for a lot of issues that interests me and what we're talking about in this movie, and even in Islam and the Future of Tolerance, is the first point is to admit that there is something that requires a solution, right? When Majid Nawaz mentioned, I remember when we were filming, when he mentioned that the solution to the Muslim problem, like everyone was like, "Whoa, can you say that?" Right? Just those lines just sound so taboo. But what he was referring to was a very valid situation that the whole world was facing, right? In this film, that, if the world doesn't, when I say world, I'm primarily here referring to the West. If the West doesn't come to the practical reality that there is a real problem that is brewing, that is going to potentially upend its entire being, it's going to be too late by the time that you realize, we should have looked at this earlier. So yeah, it's important. It is incredibly important to acknowledge the grievances that they're real. And I get quite a bit of pushback for what I'm about to say now by my own people in Sri Lanka, because we had a civil war. A lot of the war was between the Sinhalese majority government versus a Tamil minority terrorist group. I know I use the word terrorist because they were a terrorist group, but they were freedom fighters for a certain group. And the notion that those people took arms and they declared a civil war, they went and fought for it, meant there were some legitimate grievances that started that. And with every conflict, it's pointed out, Black Lives Matter, there are some legitimate grievances that are important to be acknowledged. But what can easily happen is it can then turn into something a lot sinister. Use the grievance as your sort of jumping off point to create something. Again, most scenarios, it starts off with a well-intentioned outcome. You're starting off thinking, look, this is legitimate grievance. To fix that, we're going to do this. But that this ends up becoming a far more sinister. But it rarely starts off as a black and white evil thing that a group of people want to do. And then the challenge here is, how do you talk about the idea, not the people? And again, even in this movie, it is about the ideology that I am going after. And I know a lot of people will get quite upset that I am going after the individual people. Now, I'm not really going after that. I'm going after the ideas, perpetuated and then propagated by the furthest of the left.
Film is probably one of the only, maybe radio, maybe music, one of the only ways to communicate this, because yes, sure, people have the power to pause it, to stop it, to not listen, but the other person on the other end, whether it's the film, will keep playing. And even if the listener is upset or can't handle going to the idea because they're so trapped in their judgmental box of whatever they've decided, their limiting decision that they have made for themselves is making them unable to hear the idea and even make it a conversation. So I think this is a really great way to start a conversation, because it's really, really hard to have one face-to-face with anybody about it.
Yeah, I agree. I want to use the visual medium to its best capacity. Like, it's the animations, it's the sound mixing. I want to use all of that to amplify what I'm trying to say. So I'm speaking to as many senses as possible. So I try to grab as much attention of the person who's watching. When you do that, hopefully it should prompt something. And I know that it works because I have tangible evidence. After the Islam and the Future of Tolerance became what it is, I've started seeing all around the world certain language that we put out, people are using it. Like it became commonplace. I started hearing in Australia, big name, sport players who would be interviewed about some game, and towards the end of it, they'll just drop a line from the film. I know they got it from watching the film, or they'll talk about Majid Nawaz. There was no other way for them to hear about him. So I am very interested in using the visual medium to give people information, but ultimately prompt them to just have a internal dialogue and give them enough tools, then they can actually go out and talk to somebody else as well. And because, like the both of these issues that I'm talking about, it can get very dicey, very easy. Like you can offend somebody very easily if you said the wrong thing, because the other person is thinking that you're coming from one, either it's a bad faith argument or you're being attacked, and they're taking it very personally. And that's exacerbated by social media, because they are already at a certain point. They already feel like, they're being attacked just for being who they are. And I'm hopefully trying to showcase that that's not the point of anything we're trying to do.
I was raised in an environment where my parents taught me that there were three primary ways of existing in the world. And one was, I have my set of beliefs and you should too have the same ones. And, the second place is sort of as a submissive person, well, you have all your beliefs and I'll just take whatever you're believing, And then there's the third point of perspective, which is I have my own set of beliefs and you have your own set of beliefs. And that's the hardest way to live, because we're taught one of the other two ways of being.
Yeah, I mean, again, the movie goes into detail about this, how universities, professors can't talk about philosophical hypothesis, or they can't throw out a controversial point of view so he can get the students to debate about whether what's right, what's wrong, because it is now perceived as, just by saying that, you are taking a political stance, which is bonkers. It shouldn't be the case. We should be able to question things without being, this whole idea of, I was accused of being white supremacy adjacent, and it makes a cameo in the film. Didn't even know that was an insult that existed before it was presented to me, and that makes absolutely no sense in my head. But that was because I was giving a platform to somebody who was perceived to be a white supremacist. Although this person that I'm referring to is a Jewish professor, but she was considered a white supremacist by a group. And me being, talking to her and giving her a platform automatically made me a white supremacy adjacent. And I'm now learning, because I work very closely with a young man by the name of Coleman Hughes. If your listeners don't know who he is, please check him out. He's an extraordinary mind. Because of his work, I've learned that him and a whole slew of African-American Black intellectuals are all racist. I didn't know that, the same group of people were telling me for years that Black people cannot be racist. But now they have redefined their own redefinition, and they've marked a certain group of their own to be racist. It's this whole sort of labeling people and accusing people, just trying to have a conversation, it needs to come to a point where we call out for what it is. That's not the Enlightenment West. That's not how we do things. You can have your opinion, and I can have mine. But that doesn't mean I hate you, if I don't agree with you. It's fine, we disagree. That's what people don't realize, is that's most of the world. But again, this goes to another issue, because people tend to live in their own realities. I don't know if you've seen Tristan Harris's documentary on Netflix, the social dilemma. We live in a world where we are now presented our own realities through every device that we use. And everyone has their own reality and they live it. And it is very hard to break out of it because it is so ingrained in everything we do. This is only going to get worse. And I think if we don't raise the alarm now and force the conversation, the national psyche in the West, across the board, we are going, when it happens and the masses realize it, it'll be too late. You need to have the conversation now.
Documentary filmmaker, Desh Amila. Tune in next time for more Filmmaking Confidential. It is totally free to subscribe, and when you subscribe, you'll get upcoming new episodes automatically, and you'll have free access to all our past shows. Please remember to rate and review. The Filmmaking Confidential podcast is a production of Dekanga Audio and produced by myself and Ella Spencer. Our theme music is composed by Kevin Robles. For more of the Filmmaking Confidential podcast, head over to filmmakingconfidential.com. If you have a question about filmmaking you'd like answered on the podcast, send me an email using the contact form on the website. To learn more of my filmmaking secrets, be sure to pick up a copy of the book, Filmmaking Confidential, available on Audible, paperback, and ebook, wherever books are sold. I'm Steve Balderson. Thanks for listening and spreading the word. Until next time, keep making, keep doing, keep going.